Welcome to Tabletop Assault. I'm Ross, and today I am going to do our first sort of talk about tactics and focusing today on the Adeptus Mechanicus. I'm going to be having a look mainly at, well, the structure of how we're going to do this is we're basically going to do a couple of short videos looking at certain aspects of Adeptus Mechanicus. This one is focusing purely on sort of the army fundamentals, so I'll be having a look at keywords and the main abilities that the Adeptus Mechanicus has, and later on I will do focuses on each of the units. That way you guys can have a look at the units that you particularly like, and I will talk about them for about 7 to 10 minutes each, about sort of their function and viability. But for this intro video I'm going to have a look at the army as a whole. Now that's the first time I've done this. I don't know how it's going to work out. We'll find out, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of people tell me aspects I may have got wrong. So with that, I'm going to begin by describing a wee bit of history of Adeptus Mechanicus, because they're one of the more recent additions to Games Workshop 40k universe. Now, originally Adeptus Mechanicus were two separate factions. They were released, I believe, as Scutari back in about April, start of 2015, going into mid 2015, and it was very unusual for its time because they didn't have an HQ, which was quite unusual. Bit of a smaller force, but everyone absolutely sort of loved them because people were looking for sort of Adeptus Mechanicus units, and the Vanguard and Rangers were really cool models, and the Walking Chickens. We then also got the Cult Mechanicus, which came out not long afterwards, which were clearly sort of another side to the faction that sort of worked quite well with the Scutari. So as we moved into 8th edition, the simplest thing to make a lot easier for people was to bring them into one faction, which Games Workshop have done, which makes everything a lot easier. So that's a bit of the history of when Adeptus Mechanicus came round, and why you will notice in the book, if you've not really had any experience with them before, why you see both sort of Scutari and Cult Mechanicus. They used to be two separate books. Put them together makes it a lot easier. They used to have one of the most feared formations before, which was, I didn't like playing it because it was really kind of cruel to your opponent. Now you don't get that, but at least you get them in one faction. So what are the key aspects to sort of an Adeptus Mechanicus army? Now I'm going to begin by discussing keywords. Now I believe these are they are fundamental to the new 8th edition, how a lot of the rules work. Essentially what they are, if you want to simplify it, is by thinking of them as your Legion if you play Space Marines, or your Legion if you play Chaos Space Marines. It's basically sort of where your army sort of works around. For Adeptus Mechanicus, this is Forge World. Now the point of this is to really sort of bring a bit of synchronization to your force, and also a bit of flavour if you want to add in a bit of lore. So the Forge World is basically where your army comes from and who they represent. So you might think that you might want to use some of the ones that Games Workshop give you. There's a whole variety of ones. You can have a look through the lore, or you can create your own, get a bit of your own colour scheme, get a bit of variety. The key aspects of keywords is to make sure that some abilities only work when forces have the same keywords. Now the easiest example of this in Adeptus Mechanicus, there is only one unit, as far as I'm aware, that does require you to have a keyword Forge World, and you don't get an option on it. And you're going to have to excuse me here, as I really need to research the name. Is Bellaris Cole? We'll just call him Cole. He is of the Forge World Mars, and so thus for any of his abilities, I believe, have to help out other units, they also need to be Mars. Now I'll go into Colin in our video. I'll explain sort of him in detail because he's worth talking about. But if you are beginning sort of an Adeptus Mechanicus army, to keep it simple, I would highly suggest just going Mars, unless you really want to add a new own flavour. Just keep it simple. If you want to go straight into the game, just go cool, keyword, Forge World, Mars, you're all good to go. Keep it simple, and especially if you've got Call, because he's a cool guy. Now one of the key aspects to Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, each force has sort of their own abilities that make them quite unique and will affect them. To give an example, Undation No Fear, Space Marines, Death to the False Emperor for Heretics, which is quite new, Orders for Astronautorum. For Adeptus Mechanicus, for those who haven't played them previously, it is Canticles of the Omnissiah. Now, this used to be a Cult Mechanicus rule exclusively in their codex, and Scutari had their own stuff. Now they are just all the same. Now, a couple of key things to remember with this is that there's actually 6 different abilities that you can use, which is quite cool, so you've got a bit of an option. And you activate them at the start of the battle round. So it used to be you'd activate it only at the beginning of your turn, you now activate it at the start of the battle round. So whether you've got first turn or not, it's really that, you know, you've got to make sure you activate it. Tell your opponent, I'm using this ability. Otherwise, I'd argue you're not using an ability, and that's a real shame because some of these are pretty good. You cannot use the same ability, you cannot elect to use the same ability twice. So you can't just keep using the same ability over and over again by choice. You can do a sort of risk it, see what you get. You roll a d6 and consult a chart, which I'll go into later, and that will tell you sort of which ability you get. So you can be lucky and get the same ability many times. Now, there is abilities to influence this chart, namely one, Call. I'll go into him later, he's quite useful. But basically, you know, you roll a d6, you might be able to get ability again if you want to keep using it. I'll explain sort of the useful side of them as well, which ones are quite good. And last thing to explain when it comes to using the Canticles is that if you're a battle-forged army, this bonus only affects if everyone in a detachment has the Canticles of the Omnissiah rule. Now, it's not so bad because everything in the Adeptus Mechanicus army does have this ability. As far as I'm aware, if I've got it wrong, please tell me, and I've been playing this game wrong in the various games I've played so far. But as far as I know, and it makes sense, everything in Adeptus Mechanicus does have that. So make sure your detachment is made up of everyone with Canticles of Omnissiah, or don't use Canticles of Omnissiah. It's your choice. Wouldn't recommend that though. So I'll quickly go into the 6 rules and see what I think of them. So for the first one, if you choose to elect it, or if you roll dice on a 1 on a dice, you get Incantations of the Iron Soul, which allows you can reroll morale tests for affected units. Now, being able to reroll morale, very useful, very handy. You're not taking well, I don't see many Adeptus Mechanicus taking big blobs, so if you are having to take a morale check, it's gonna be kind of tricky, but overall, not bad, you know, it's a real handy, great. Number 2, if you roll a 2, Literacy of the Electromancer. This is roll a d6 for each enemy unit that is within 1 inch of an affected unit. On a roll of 6, the unit being rolled for suffers d3 mortal wounds. Right. Ooh, difficult one. Now, this one's clearly, you know, meant for the sort of combat side of Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, I don't have much history of going for the combat side of Adeptus Mechanicus, but I can see this being useful if you've got a lot of multiple small units on combat. You know, you can cause d3 mortal wounds. Mortal wounds are always nice, but the sheer fact that this only affects in a 6-up means that 1 in 6 units that are within 1 inch of an enemy unit are going to cause d3 mortal wounds. You know, 1 in 6, d3 mortal wounds, I really struggle in that one. I really do. There is a lot more helpful abilities than, you know, Literacy of the Electromancer. Number 3, if you score a 3 on your dice, is Chant of Remorseless Fist. Yes, it's a cool name. You can re-roll any failed hit rolls of 1 for affected units in this fight phase. Again, another one that is looking at the combat aspects of Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, they do have some not bad combat units. You do have Electro Priests, which I've not really had the best result with in the past, but they are combat orientated, so a wee bit. You do have Infiltrators and Trust Stalkers, which I'm a big fan of, and you do have Castellan Robots. If you choose not to take them with shooting, you can choose to take them with fists, and they are actually quite terrifying with their fists as well. Being able to reroll ones to hit, always kind of useful if you have taken a close combat force for Adeptus Mechanicus. One, good for you. Not done it myself, but hey ho, good for you. This is the one you'll probably be looking to get. Now number 4, which if you score a 4 on the dice you roll for random, is probably one of the sort of go-to useful ones you might find, which is Shroud Slam. Shroud Slam, yep. Number 4. Affects units gain the bonus to their armour saving throws as if they were in cover. Units already in cover are unaffected. Why is that handy? Well, with the new FAQ of like vehicles, it becomes a bit more difficult to get cover with vehicles and also other units. Just being able to have straight up, you've got cover, no questions, you've just got cover. Very, very handy, especially with a lot of the weapons being quite short ranged for some units. Being able to march forward and know you are going to get that cover save is very, very helpful. So I'm a big fan of that one. I often push for it because, you know, extra saving throw is always handy. Highly recommend it. Probably one of the top ones you will go for and will choose to use at one point. Number 5, if you score a dice of 5, 5 on your dice, if you choose to roll randomly, is Invocation of Machine Might. Fixed units have +1 strength. Again, not bad. Now you do have combat forces, you know, I said the Rough Stalkers, you have Infiltrators, and even Vanguards, which lower units' toughness, boost their strength up a wee bit, meaning that, for instance, you know, can make them a lot more stronger. So if you were struggling and if you had a lot of things in combat, I would really struggle between this and Chant of Remorseless Fists, which is the reroll ones in the fight phase for what I'd want to do. I'd probably go for reroll hits. Rerolls are very handy over +1 strength, but you can find a big advantage of being a slightly higher strength with all your units. But again, it's very focused on fight phase, so unless you've got a fight oriented army, I'm kind of struggling with it. Last but not least, probably another one of my favourite ones is Benediction of the Omnissiah. Now this is number 6. If you roll a 6 with your random dice, you can reroll failed hit rolls of 1 for all affected units in the shooting phase. Now I'm a big fan of this one, along with number 4, Shroud Slam. A lot of the Adeptus Mechanicus I use is shooting orientated. Now, being able to reroll ones, absolutely fantastic. It just means that, you know, especially if you use plasma, you've got less fear of your guy getting slayed outright. He might actually, or you know, he might survive, which is really handy. However, the only thing I would note on this one is that for your HQ choices, this doesn't synergize too well. I'll go into the HQ choices, of which there's 2, Call and Attack Priest Dominus, but it doesn't quite gel as much. But they've got a range of which their ability can take effect. This affects your whole army. It just means that obviously you can get a bit more breathing, a bit more space between them. So that's all the Canticles of the Omnissiah. You can see there's quite a few. There's some on survival there, some onto combat, and some into the shooting phase, which they focus on. Me personally, I tend to really go with Shroud Slam for the cover save. It's excellent, and Benediction of the Omnissiah, mainly because I focus quite a lot on shooting. How do I feel about Canticles of the Omnissiah? Is a bit mixed bag, almost, how's the saying go, you know, jack of all trades, master of none, compared to, you know, options such as A Nation with No Fear, where you know that's what it's going to do and it's quite a good ability and you're going to get it every turn. You can base your army around that, same as you know, Heretics, their Death to the False Emperor. And then obviously you've got orders for Astra Militarum, in which you get to choose them no matter what, which is quite handy, and you can change it. It doesn't affect the whole army, it changes per unit, I believe, although you are restricted by how many officers you've got. It can be risky. You can have a very shooting army and you've ran out of the shooting options, of which really there's only one, and Shroud Slam for survival, and you roll for it, you don't get what you're after. can be tricky, a bit more orientated, I would argue, for combat. Combat, 3 of them are quite close combat orientated. I just don't feel that with Adeptus Mechanicus. I really don't. Love to hear what you think about close combat Adeptus Mechanicus. I've never tried it. I've used Centurion Dragoons in combat and they've been okay. But I'd love to hear your opinion on that one, of what do you think of Mechanical Zola Messiah. I think it's taken a wee bit of a hit personally since last edition, but it's still pretty cool. I still enjoy it. It allows for the first couple of turns I get good choices what I want, then I'm always going to risk it later on, because I've had great luck with risk and it's been fantastic. So Mechanical Zola Messiah have been quite essential there. What are the key things that I think the army as a whole are strong in or sort of missing? Exactly. Now, key things, I'm going to begin with what they're missing. They've got no psychers. Not unsurprising. They've got no psychers, so that's a little bit of a disadvantage, where you've got no defense at all against really psychic opponents, and you don't have any way to buff your units with psychers. Psychers can be very useful in this edition. I've had great fun with them, but if you're playing Adeptus Mechanicus, you won't. Now, the real key ones I feel is a problem is, one, the minor one is no flyers. I've not really played flyers yet in 8th edition, however not having them in 7th edition for Adeptus Mechanicus was a bit strange, a bit of an odd one, and I'm hoping we get some cool flyers later on. I mean, like, for goodness sake, we're literally half robots, you'd think they'd have more flyers. But the key one I find as a problem is no transports. Why do I believe this is a bit of a weird one? Well, again, Adeptus Mechanicus, especially, you know, Call has been just chucking out tanks, troops and everything for Space Marines recently. You think you'd go, hey, if some of my guys need something to get them into range. Vanguard, which was probably my favourite unit of last edition in the armies I played. They were cheap, they were short ranged, but they had scout. They could get into range quite effectively and throw a ton of dice. Generally quite scary. I'd say they're not as scary anymore, but they definitely need a transport to keep them a bit more survivable, to get them into position to start attacking their opponent. So I'd love to see some really cool transports for Adeptus Mechanicus. But yeah, no psychers, no transports, no flyers. It's a bit of a worry. The other last one, as I'd say, is that they've only got one main HQ choice. Now, the other one is a special character, so you're limited to one, but you do only have a Tech Priest Dominus, and their selection is a little bit weird for Tech Priests. I'll go into them in detail, but not having that variety for your HQs limits you later on, and I'll explain that now with sort of, I'll go into one of the things, recommended detachments. The recommended detachment for me personally, and again I'd love to hear comments to say, no Ross, that's not how you play Adeptus Mechanicus, is the Spearhead detachment, which I believe is, to get that one going, is you just need to have 1 HQ, so you can go with your Tech Priest Dominus or Call, and you have 3 heavy supports. Now, the reason why I say that is heavy supports, I believe, now you are sacrificing 2 command points, but heavy supports are absolutely the sort of area in which Adeptus Mechanicus do shine, and you only need to use 1 HQ, which I feel is really good for Adeptus Mechanicus. Just use 1 HQ because you don't have the Psyker advantage or any sort of, you know, secondary unit that can buff your units compared to some armies that can. You've just got Tech Priest Dominus, you can only need 1. So I'm going to, with that, Spearhead 1, you only get 1 extra command point, I believe, and you do get to use 3 heavy supports, and I think you can use up to 6, which is really cool. Albeit, to discuss heavy supports, and that is where I think is the key area for Adeptus Mechanicus, is you only have 2 choices at the moment for AdMech, and that is the Doom Trawler, which is a fantastic tank with a ton of shooting options, really good anti-flyer, kinda good anti-vehicle / anti-bike stuff, with its neutron laser. Generally you can't really go wrong with them, and an advantage is that Tech Priest Dominus beside him can also heal him and also cause extra buffs, but I'll go into those units later. The other unit is probably the most feared unit for Adeptus Mechanicus. I'll go into their reasons why in another video, but it's the Castellan Robots. I used them previously and I thought they were okay, you know, not bad. Now, when I first came, I played with them. I was playing against David and I unleashed fury upon him that he was quite surprised, and now just about every game he does everything he can to make sure they go down first, because they can be a serious problem. If you've not had a quick look at Castellan Robots, I highly recommend you do. I take them basically as shooting as possible with heavy phosphor, because they are just annihilation in a unit if you use them correctly with a data smith. I believe they are. Highly recommend you look into them. I will do a video discussing them in a bit more detail, but I feel you won't regret it. They are really good and they will threaten your enemy significantly. Even if your opponent gets first turn, they'll be highly survivable in their first turn as well, which is always very handy. So what would I like to see for AdMech in the future as a whole? I would like to see their Forge World units gain some rules. Now I have read that Games Workshop are going to do that. I did invest in some, I'm still working on them at the moment, taking a wee bit backbench from them because in 7th edition they were fantastic. I believe they were peltists and hoplites of the Adeptus Mechanicus, basically like sort of Titan guards. Really cool models, love them. However, they don't have rules at the moment, and I believe Games Workshop have said they're going to sort that out, as well as some new units for Adeptus Mechanicus, possibly. I'm going into rumour here, so I really don't want to say, but it's been discussed a wee bit, is that some 30k units are going to be coming out and helping Adeptus Mechanicus, which might be cool. But I'm really hoping that they add some kind of buff unit, because if a great comment we saw from someone was Adeptus Mechanicus were like the Imperial Necrons. I was like, that's really cool. Maybe not in survivability, I personally believe, but like if they gained intelligence, they gained bonuses. But having what works for Necrons quite a lot is buff units, buff HQs. I would love a more dedicated buff HQ who really helped out in the Adeptus Mechanicus. I think that would be really handy. Again, and then transports and flyers would be really handy as well. So I see a lot of potential with Adeptus Mechanicus. I see they've really just put together the Cult Mechanicus and the Scutari. They've got it functioning, but I see a lot of potential. And when they first came out, a lot of love for them as well, because there were some cool units that people were looking for ages. And I think you know, the future's looking bright for Adeptus Mechanicus. We've just got to see how that works out for them. So that'll be the end of sort of my army overview of Adeptus Mechanicus. Again, I've not focused on units as such. I'll hopefully do short videos on the specific units. Again, I hope for them not to be over 7 or 10 minutes long. I've made this way too long already. But you know, that way you can basically know what unit I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to try and talk about them in as much detail as possible. And especially if you like that unit, like how would Ross play them? You can go, cool, I've seen that video, that's how Ross would play them. I'm definitely not going to do it that way, because that doesn't sound like sound advice. Thanks again for watching. If you liked, please give us a like. Please like, share and subscribe, as we usually say. Let me know in the comments below. Tell me what parts, and I'm meaning mainly just the army overview. You know, what do you think of Forge Worlds, of all that jazz? What do you think of Canticles of the All Messiah? Is it good? Is it bad? Is there anything you would change for it? Originally I thought it should actually be two sort of tables, one focused on shooting, one on close combat, similar to what the Scutari had in Doctrines. I thought that would be a lot more clearer, but this does simplify it quite a wee bit. And what weaknesses and strengths do you see in the Adeptus Mechanicus? Thanks again. We'll see you on another talk about tactics, if you will, about the Adeptus Mechanicus.